Welcome to the Insight Meditation Community of Charlottesville, Virginia. You can find all of our program offerings and information about our Sangha at www.imeditation.org. We meet weekly on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, currently on the Zoom platform, for meditation and a Dharma talk given by one of our teachers. We also meet daily at noon Eastern Time on Zoom for sitting practice. We hope you can join us.
All right, Sangha. Well, it is my honor to introduce our guest teacher tonight. Her name is Sharon Shelton. She's been studying and practicing meditation for over 15 years. She is a certified mindfulness teacher and member of the International Mindfulness Teachers Association. The study and practice of mindfulness have changed her life since she discovered the Dharma in the early years of recovery from alcoholism in the late 1990s. Sharon is founding advisor and teacher at Cloud Sangha, which is a really cool organization. If you want to ever look that up, just as an aside. She's also a guest teacher at Triangle Insight Meditation Community in Durham, North Carolina. She is an ordained interfaith minister, speaker, and coach. Since 2007, Sharon has been credentialed as a certified professional coach. And this is really cool. She was voted a top life coach in Raleigh, North Carolina for the last 4 years, from 2017 until 2020. She is a native New Yorker, as those of you who had been listening to our conversation might have heard. And she currently lives in Cary, North Carolina with her wife, Dr. Michelle Bailey. Sharon is also a friend of mine, and I'm just really pleased that you're here. So thank you, Sharon, for coming, and thanks so much for your time.
Yes, thank you so much, Liz, for inviting me. I have the pleasure of getting to know Liz over the past couple years, and it's been so wonderful to get to know you better, Liz. So thank you for inviting me. And really, I think I want to start by lifting up my teachers and mentors. There's so many of them who really continue to inspire me and guide me on this path. I stand on a whole lot of shoulders, and also a deep bow in particular to the Asian and Asian American community, out of which these practices emerged. I don't hear that expressed often, but I want to express it as often as I can, because I have such deep gratitude for these practices that really have changed my life. Again, so good to be here with you. And I had planned to talk about equanimity, and I still am in an interesting way. I didn't think I was last week, because last Tuesday I lost my favorite aunt. And fortunately, I was able to get to the house before they took her away. And I was able to sit there with her for about a good hour and a half, and talk to her, felt her as her body got colder and colder and colder. And it was a profound experience of impermanence, but also a profound experience of equanimity. And that's going to kind of form the basis of my talk, this practice of equanimity. And what I think the Brahma-viharas have been a focal point of my practice, the love practices, for several years. And they continue to support a deepening of my practice. And I noticed the other significant recent loss that I had was the loss of my teacher, Sherry Maples, in 2017. And although there was some peacefulness and ease in that loss, mixed with all the grief, this loss was different. And I think it was just fruits of practice, fruits of actively cultivating these heart practices, these Brahma-viharas, as they're called, these heart and mind states that are really aspects of our truest nature. And so since Aunt Sophie passed, we had her funeral on Sunday, Equanimity in particular has really provided me access to so much ease and peace and even joy alongside of the grief. And so you all may know what the Brahma Viharas are, but the Brahma Viharas are essentially specific heart states that the Buddha talked about, that would counteract unwholesome tendencies of greed, hatred, and delusion, and all of their cousins, anger, fear. The cultivation of these heart states would counteract the unwholesome tendencies that cause suffering. And there are 4 Brahma Viharas. 2 are pretty popular. The first one is metta in Pali. Pali is the language of the Buddha. Metta, or loving kindness. Karuna, or compassion. Mudita, or sympathetic joy, appreciative joy. And upekkha, which is equanimity. And they've been described as the 4 faces of love. And according to Gil Fronsdal, this image of a 4-faced heart is really borrowed from the Buddhist myth of the god Brahma, who had 4 faces, one for each of the 4 kinds of unselfish love talked about in Buddhism. And that when we actively arouse and cultivate these inner states, we're really attuning our heart and mind to loving kindness, to compassion, to joy, to equanimity. We become more familiar with the experience of them, the presence of them in our hearts and minds, independent of circumstances happening on the outside. So we can learn to recognize these heart states or these expressions of love when they arise, like, oh, metta is here, compassion is here, joy is here, equanimity is here. And we can also arouse them when they're not present. I often arouse loving kindness when I'm watering my plants. And we can savor them. We can develop them. We can cultivate them. We can kind of sort of roll them around in our hearts and minds, which then again inclines the heart and the mind in a certain direction that can support wise effort. And these heart and mind states like compassion and love are really what we experience naturally when our fear and conditioning and all the delusion are not in control. And we rest in the presence. We're resting in our inherent nature, regardless of circumstance. It's just that we're not as practiced doing that. Thank you, negativity bias. We're not practiced in orienting our minds and our hearts in this way. Because evolutionarily and conditionally, we're trained to notice what's wrong, to problem solve, to look out for danger. So this takes some effort, this cultivation of these heart states that support our practice, that support the arising of compassion and wisdom. And so although it doesn't get a lot of attention like metta and compassion typically do, equanimity, I found, is one of the most liberating mental attitudes because it's really the ground for wisdom and compassion. It enables us to experience life's ebbs and flows without being hooked by either clinging or aversion. And with the passing of Aunt Sophie, there was really a true experience of equanimity without effort, just as a result of my deliberate cultivation over the years. Equanimity arose as I sat with her. There was essentially a feeling of nothing is going wrong here. Nothing is going wrong here. And this, and this. And not as some sort of spiritual bypass to try and feel better, but really as an opening of the aperture, so to speak. An opening of the aperture. Equanimity is described by the Buddha as the highest form of happiness. And as I understand it, he said a mind filled with equanimity is abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and ill will. And so sometimes when I talk about equanimity, I can get into some interesting discussions with some of my friends. And so while some may think equanimity is some sort of like remote, neutral passivity, there's a distinction between the calm acceptance of equanimity and apathy or indifference. So apathy and indifference are often driven by a subtle aversion to life as it is, some resistance or some turning away. And then we don't take any action. We don't respond. We maybe feel overwhelmed and disconnected. So we often lack compassionate engagement when feeling indifferent or apathetic. So alternatively, equanimity is a state of mind and heart that meets our experience, whatever arises for us, whether it's the 10,000 joys or the 10,000 sorrows, with a steady openness, with curiosity, with wakefulness, instead of habitual conditioning. And it can really cultivate this steadiness, this steady ground. And in that ground, it can be the firm ground for liberating insight into the true nature of all phenomena. The fact that, like Ruth King says, nothing's perfect, nothing's permanent, and nothing's personal. That calm steadiness can make space for the arising, the re-remembering of the truth. So we can be curious about those moments when we're not equanimous, because they really point to places where we're not yet free from the three poisons, this conditioning. So nothing's going wrong in those moments when we are not equanimous. They're just moments that point to where we're not free, where we can turn our practice. We can ask, what are the narratives? What are the patterns that typically arise that lead to clinging or aversion or grasping or fighting? We can turn our practice to those heart and mind states with as much compassion as we can muster in the moment. So when bringing an equanimous attitude to grief, for example, or the suffering of profound injustice and this entrenched racism, for example, I can notice what gets in the way of dropping into my heart, what gets in the way of accessing my wisdom, accessing my steadiness. And I realize often it's my aversion to the 10,000 sorrows. It's the stories I tell myself that suffering shouldn't happen, that humans shouldn't be humaning, that those I love should always be physically here. And then I suffer. I close down, forgetting the three marks of existence. So we can still do our work in the world. We can still navigate our lives. We can still grieve loss, but from an equanimous spaciousness, with a heart that is fully open, skillfully, which is truthfully more regenerative. So we can still aspire for liberation for ourselves and others. But there's a difference I've found between aspiration and expectation. When I expect, I suffer. When I expect there to be no racism, or there to be no oppression, or for those I love to be here all the time, I suffer. When I have an aspiration that keeps me soft, keeps me open, keeps me creative, keeps me resilient, keeps me connected. And especially when dealing with other humans, when we're dealing with other humans with equanimity, it helps us to distinguish people from their actions without othering, without hating, without feeding harmful narratives and actions that often come from familial or cultural conditioning and traumas. And as I understand these teachings, we all have access to equanimity and we can cultivate it, just like metta, just like karuna, just like mudita. And truth is, we're practicing something every day. We're practicing fear. We're practicing trust. We're practicing doubt. We're practicing patience. We're practicing love. We're practicing equanimity. We're practicing compassion. That which we practice gets stronger, becomes more apparent in our experience. So my invitation is really to be deliberate about what you're practicing. What are you practicing in any given moment? Are you cultivating mind and heart states that serve awakening? Equanimity can also be understood as protection from what are called the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, success and failure, pleasure and pain, and fame and disrepute. And these are the experiences that can just blow us around on any given day. And without equanimity, we are literally at their mercy. So when we practice, we're training and noticing and practicing with these worldly winds without being caught up in them, without being blown over by them. Becoming attached to the pleasant stuff like success, praise, fame, and pleasure can create suffering when the winds of life inevitably change direction. The nature of life is impermanent. For example, achievement and success can be great, but if it leads to greed and arrogance, we cause harm to ourselves and others. Becoming overly attached to praise can lead to a dependence on validation or a lack of humility. Identifying too much with failure, we may collapse around the feeling of incompetence or inadequacy. Becoming overly invested in our pain, being defined by it, whether it's physical pain or an emotional pain, we may become discouraged and not seeing what else is here. For example, sadness is here, grief is here, but what's also here is love and gratitude and tenderness and ease and peace and love. Pema Chodron said, to cultivate equanimity, we practice catching ourselves when we feel attraction or aversion before it hardens into grasping or negativity. So we're practicing catching ourselves with compassion and gentleness, which then helps us to develop the capacity to respond to life skillfully, just as it is in this moment, rather than reacting automatically from habitual conditioning that's often driven by clinging and aversion. So equanimity can support us in standing in the midst of it all, the injustices and the beauty and the pain and the grief and the bliss, and remain balanced and steady and centered. Like bamboo, a Japanese proverb, the bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. Tara's always encouraging me, and this, and this, and this. So if we really understand that our sense of well-being, our liberation, is independent of the 8 worldly winds, we're more likely to remain equanimous when they arise. And that's freedom. And we can practice cultivating equanimity informally or formally. We can start small instead of having to work with intense experiences all the time, like with spouses or mothers or fathers or climate change, or we can start small. I often practice equanimity with itches. I'll notice an itch, and instead of responding right? Responding to the itch. I'll be like, interesting, throbbing, tingling, pulsing. And I'll sit with the itch and I'll wait a few minutes. I get this from Gil Fronsdal. Wait a little while. And then if the itch is still there after 3 times of doing that, then I scratch it. But it's the practice of making space for your entire experience with equanimity without having to just respond with clinging or aversion. And often I notice what happens is the itch goes away. It just goes away. Or you can practice waiting in line for something, or waiting on hold for something, or waiting for traffic lights to turn green. Notice the impulse. You can practice with mildly triggering comments on social media. When the thoughts arise, this shouldn't happen. They shouldn't be like this. When the phone or the computer's not working, we can practice equanimity. These are ways that strengthen our equanimity muscle, for example. We watch the stories arising. Stories like this shouldn't be happening, or this means something about me. We just, instead of saying, and this is here. And equanimity and mindfulness go hand in hand, obviously. If we're not mindful of or attuned to our mental and emotional states as they arise, we won't be able to tell if we're balanced or not in the moment, if we're steady or not. It's only when we know our center, that experience of steadiness, that we will know when we're off center. So this attunement becomes critical. We can cultivate equanimity in our formal meditation, for example. We can do something like, centering ourselves, finding our stillness, relaxing, finding our ground and center, and then bringing to mind an event that frustrates us. I've done this for the past several weeks with a contractor I was working with on my deck. He became really good equanimity practice. So you feel the emotions that you have for this event for a few minutes. Really feel it, the frustration, the righteousness, the rah, rah, rah. And then let it go. And then bring to mind an event that really arouses pleasant states. I often bring to mind my wedding. And again, feel the emotions that I have for this event for a couple minutes. Oh, it was beautiful. The love. Sherry was there. That was the last. It was just beautiful. Friends and love. And I'm there. And then I alternate between these favorable and unfavorable events, and then coming back to center. And that practice has a way of supporting me with emotional resilience and some stability, less reactivity with passing mental and emotional states. So we can practice in these formal ways in addition to just as we go through our day. And again, moments when we're triggered or hooked, as Pema Chodron would call, these moments can help us to practice and cultivate this equanimity. These challenging moments can really become mindfulness bells. Like, itching is here. Let me turn my practice to it. Instead of, damn it, itching is here. And we can practice just being with something as it is, pausing, and allowing wise effort to come out of that steadiness instead of out of reactivity. And so these practices, like these heart practices, like equanimity, they're not like hacks to feel better, right? They're not just hacks to feel better. They're part of the path to liberation. They're part of the path of liberation. There's a freedom from the need to choreograph people, events, and experiences so that we can experience ease and joy and peace and tranquility unconditionally. And cultivating equanimity can be especially subversive in our culture, particularly in the West, where the dominant pattern kind of equates happiness with conditional joy. We're happy and clinging to things that are pleasant. We're unhappy and aversive to things that are unpleasant. It's almost like our entire economy is built on our sense of the opposite of equanimity, whatever that word is. This need to this desire for more, to feel okay. This desire for experiences, to feel enough. So we buy things, we get these new things, we have this new relationship, we have this bigger house, all in this effort to feel peaceful, to feel that all is well. And so cultivating this mindfulness, these heart practices are really countercultural, but they are the path to ease and tranquility and peace and joy. There's this space of spaciousness and calm. It's independent of circumstance. And it really offers us a place where our minds and our hearts can rest. This embodied understanding of, and this. It has within it a deep sense of contentment, an ease of being, a sense that all is well. That's beyond all these causes and conditions. And so I'm extraordinarily grateful for this practice. And sometimes you don't fully appreciate it until something smacks you upside the head. And your practice kicks in. And you have the space that can hold it all, that can be with the grief and the sadness. And it can coexist with joy. But that doesn't happen, in my experiences, as I understand it from my teachers, without cultivation. It doesn't happen without cultivation, without a consistent, sincere turning our practice to what is with radical compassion. And when we're not able to do that, because I don't think we were ever designed to do this alone, when we're not able to do that, we resource ourselves. We resource ourselves externally, with Sangha, with mentors, with podcasts like 10% Happier, or with books and Dharma Seed, and we resource ourselves with reminders of the truth. Spiritual buddies, like Liz is one of mine. And we internally resource ourselves with breathing, with slowing down, with practices like rain, recognizing, allowing, investigating, and nurturing. And so I've just found there's no better way to spend my time than cultivating heart practices like equanimity. And let me share this really quickly, because I had someone I'm mentoring, and we were talking about equanimity, and she was describing how hard it was. It's just hard. And because there was a lot of suffering. And I said, it's already hard. What you described to me is already hard. And so you're saying equanimity is also hard. So my encouragement is to do the right hard things. Do the right hard things. She was like, oh. And there's no third option. It's like, no. So do the right hard things. This deconditioning is a right hard thing. This practicing, staying is the right hard thing. This opening to the reality, the truth that we are vulnerable. Spinning on a rock in outer space is hard, can be hard. but it's the path to freedom. It's the path to liberation. So that's what I wanted to offer today. I hope there was something in there that was helpful.